If you suffer from trypophobia, you might want to look away right now. Guten gardening, everybody. Now be honest with me, how many of you just looked up what trypophobia is? Now granted, this isn't exactly an example of trypophobia. However, it kind of looks a little bit weird when you look at these purple Magic Molly potatoes that we overwintered in this bucket of sand. And today we're going to do a review of how well that worked for us and talk about a few of the variables that might have impacted the results. But for those of you who don't remember, we initially did this video back in December when we talked about an inexpensive way to overwinter your potatoes if you don't have a root cellar, which we don't. We used our free buckets that we've gotten from local stores, and we used some inexpensive sand. We added a few inches of sand to the bottom of the bucket, then added our potatoes and layered all the way up to about 4 inches from the top of the bucket. Now there's a couple of things I want to talk about before we get into how well we think this worked. First, I mentioned at the time that we put these into the sand that the method here was supposed to be one where we went through and we took out some of the potatoes to use over time. So it's not some sort of miracle going to preserve these forever method. We knew that going in, but because we wanted to see how well this would do over those past 5 or 6 months, we didn't take any out. So that's one thing to take into consideration. Additionally, where we stored this was in an area of our basement where the temperature is consistently around 60 degrees. Now that's a little bit warm for what we'd like, but that just happens to be where our basement maintains a temperature, whether it's winter or summer typically. And the place where we put them, we closed the shades so there was only a little bit of ambient light coming in. It wasn't like there was a whole bunch of light there, and it was far away from the heat of our indoor growing area where we've been growing all winter long. But there's another thing I think we need to take into consideration here, and that is that when we've researched how long to cure potatoes prior to putting them in storage like this, the typical recommendation is about 2 weeks. And these Magic Mollies were not put in after 2 weeks. In fact, it was well over a month and a half from harvest before we finally got these into storage. And honestly, I think that probably had something to do with the amount of time then that we had, that this was going to help us in terms of storing our potatoes. We also have to remember, I think, that different potatoes have different shelf lives anyway. So some potatoes store really well and some don't. Well, these Magic Mollies, as you can see, have definitely sprouted quite a bit. In fact, there's not a lot of empty space here where I don't see something sprouting through. Now, typically for potatoes, we like to have them chit and sprout like this about 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch before time of planting. But as I come through here, I can see even the small ones have 5 inches, 4 inches of sprouting. And the condition of these potatoes are kind of squishy at this point. I want to take a look at one of the ones that has sprouted a little bit more. I've got a second bucket here, and I'm going to use that to transfer some of my sand over as I go ahead and try to see exactly what we've got going on. I'm just gently dumping the sand off of here, and you can see what's been exposed down in here. You see all of those roots. Well, that is not ideal for preservation. I'm going to keep pouring sand out of here and see if I can get most of it out of here to disturb these as little as possible. You see they're all trying to come out at once, and the reason they're trying to do that is because they're all connected by those roots. The potatoes that I have in here are second generation Guten gardening potatoes, and our first generation, that first time we planted those purple Magic Molly potatoes, was pure magic. One of the best harvests I've seen. And we don't want to lose these in any way, shape, or form. We got to keep these generations going. So I'm going to pull this mass out of here, and we're going to talk about whether or not we think this will still produce for us this season. All right, I'm going to pull this out of here as one giant mass and set it right off to the side. All right, tons of roots down here. It's going to take some work, really, I think, to separate these out delicately, and we're going to have to get these planted really quickly because we don't want to leave roots exposed in any way, shape, or form. But some of these sprouts are probably 20 inches long. I mean, look at this one. That's got to be 20 inches worth of sprouting happening here. So even though they are way over sprouted, most of the ones that were bigger, the ones closer to the bottom, actually look like they're in pretty good shape. Like this one right here, because look at the size of those roots, but this isn't looking too bad, and this one's probably about 8 inches long. So I've seen this question before, what will happen when we plant these? Because this is definitely, again, not an ideal way to have your potatoes go in the ground, but will potatoes that have sprouted this long still produce? Well, fortunately for us, we actually have a video where we experimented with seed potatoes that looked almost identical to this. We have a video that goes from start to finish, from planting ones that had a foot and a half long sprout like this, all the way till time of harvest. And the harvest wasn't as big as we would have liked, but we definitely got results from those potatoes. So I think we'll definitely still be able to grow some potatoes. When we plant these, we're gonna plant them as deeply as we can. But there is a difference between these potatoes and the ones that we did that planting for, which were French fingerling potatoes. And the primary difference is that the roots that have developed here were not developed on those other potatoes. So what we wanna do, again, is to get this in the ground, and I think we are going to get some results. I don't think that they'll necessarily be the same kind of unbelievable results we got from the first planting, but I think we still have plenty of hope for some good magic mollies to get that third generation. So seeing that this is the result of putting our potatoes into that damp sand for the last 5+ months, is this the ideal way to preserve your potatoes? Especially given that we have some potatoes that were just left on the counter that haven't gotten this far along. Well, I would say that given that those factors that I talked about earlier in the video, the fact that we waited a little bit too long to put them in the sand, maybe the temperature wasn't ideal, maybe this method is better than I think. It's possible that we could do a better job preserving next time. It's also possible that this variety in particular doesn't store as long. And again, when you store in the sand instead of a root cellar, you're supposed to be eating during the season, as the season goes on. But to be honest, I don't think this was nearly as successful as we would have liked to see it. So we'd love to get your feedback here. What do you think we could have done differently with this storage method? Or what would you suggest with this storage method, if you have experience with it, that we can do to improve the storage life of these potatoes? It's a really interesting topic for us. It's one that we really were excited to see how this would turn out. And I guess now we know. Well, we hope you found today's video interesting, informative. It's a learning process for us. It's something we talk about all the time. We love growing potatoes. We love trying to figure out the best ways to maximize our yields and also storage. And this way seems to be something we need to work on. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.